Welcome to a Part 2 episode with Tim Lovestedt. We talk more about Tim's father and some of the men he worked with as an LA cop in the late 70s and 80s. I refer incorrectly to an article I read about police officers with college degrees being less likely to draw their weapon than officers without a degree. I'll address that in the close, along with a link to the actual article below the description. We discuss the ways our fathers and men of the 60s, and certainly through the 70s and 80s, dealt with their emotional issues themselves, as opposed to now in what Tim calls the post-psychotherapy era. How do you deal with your emotions? How do you deal with PTSD? How does law enforcement and other first responders deal with some of the horrific things that they see on a weekly basis? Fun and hilarious stuff like that. We talk about the different ways Tim might tell his father's story visually in terms of a feature film versus a long-form content like television. Remember, he's a screenwriter. Not broadcast television, by the way, but the binge-watching type of content we've become used to, like Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad, The Walking Dead, Dexter, and on and on and on. See how much TV you watch?
That's the stuff.
We start out this session by wrapping up our discussion of Megan Leavey, the Marine corporal from the movie of the same name that Tim Lovestedt worked on. Apparently, her Purple Heart had been stolen, if you can believe that, and returned to her in a ceremony at Yankee Stadium. She's a big Yankees fan. Plus her dog, Sergeant Rex's very different reactions to two Yankee players, Nick Swisher and Alex Rodriguez. Apparently, Rex can sniff out steroids as well as bombs. The link to that video will be at the bottom of the description as well. The Modern Moron talks about feelings and television and police work, all the good stuff with hardly any laughs. Thank you for listening. If you go on YouTube, I saw the real ceremony for Megan Leavey, and what was the dog's name? Max?
Rex.
Rex.
Yeah.
Wow, that's pretty intense.
Yeah,
that they played it at Yankee Stadium, huh?
Yeah, because she's a huge Yankees fan.
Yes.
Megan is. And then what's interesting about the real video of her getting her, I think they gave her Purple Heart back because someone had stolen it.
Really?
Yeah, she somehow along the way, someone had taken her Purple Heart out of her barracks or out of her...
Who takes a Purple Heart? That is just like, really? Do you take candy from babies too?
Yeah.
Jesus.
Yeah, so she got it at Yankee Stadium as a surprise, and she has Rex with her. There's a video of it on YouTube.
Yes.
I think it's Derek Jeter walks up, and Rex is cool. He's tails wagging. He's very excited to see Derek Jeter. And then A-Rod walks up, and he goes batshit crazy.
That dog can sniff out character.
Yeah, he smells something on that guy.
Steroids.
Yeah.
That's a great story.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing.
So I wanted to ask you, taking a step back a little bit, you cannot talk about the project you're currently working on, but I will say that what I've sort of found myself doing over the last little bit is finding, besides the story of, my dad's story and my story sort of growing up as a kid, I've worked to find stories that I find interesting, books that I find interesting. And that is tough. It's like, how many books have you read that you love the book, but they never made it into a movie or a TV show? If it's a good book, they've already made it into a movie.
Yeah, and then you have to sort of convince people that, hey, this would make a great 8-part show, like a Chernobyl or one of these shows.
Is it more profitable now? I think of the product that is Game of Thrones that HBO has, that is how many hours and hours of story, as opposed to a 2-hour, let's say a trilogy of movies. Which is more profitable to put together? And which would you prefer to do with the story about your dad? What do you envision for that, if you could do anything?
I would definitely do TV.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, so like hour long, more of a dramatic, because I think that's where all the if they made it a feature, I wouldn't argue. But there's just so much gold in TV. I mean, the way that people watch TV, I think people's mood towards television is different.
TV is better now than it's ever been.
And I also think that if you like a certain thing, TV has it for you.
When you say TV, like Netflix and Amazon and all these different platforms.
Yeah, you're going to be able to find, I sound like I'm selling some sort of service. You'll be able to find whatever you want. But it's true. I think if you like murder mystery or whatever the genre is, there's something for you. Yeah.
So you're in the process of sort of hashing out your memory of of your father being a homicide detective in Los Angeles?
Yeah. He worked as a detective. He worked Hollywood division in the late 70s
Uh-huh.
and early 80s.
Wow.
And I've talked to his old partners. Some of them, their stories alone are just a good friend of my dad. He walked the footbeat on Hollywood Boulevard from I want to say 71 to like 82.
Yeah.
Something crazy. And he worked between Highland and like Vine, something in that area.
As a plainclothes detective or as a uniformed officer?
A uniformed officer.
Okay.
And so it was very neighborhoody.
Mm-hmm.
And he sort of, or I explained it to him. He didn't explain. He sort of talked about it, but I said, "Oh, it's sort of like an ecosystem."
Oh.
Yeah, it's fine. We have tigers here, but the tigers better not get over here and eat up these deer. Like he explained it that like they knew where the drug dealers were. They knew where the pimps and the hookers were, where the tourists like to go, where the guys cruise down Hollywood Boulevard. And all of those things were fine as long as everybody stayed in their place.
So he sort of, there was a reality that you're not going to get rid of any of these things. So everybody just play in your sandbox.
Right. Like, this is terrible to say, but this is what he told me. He's like, look, we know there's going to be pimps and hookers, but just don't kill any hookers.
Wow.
I mean, it's crazy. But his point was when somebody gets killed, the whole dynamic is now going to change. Now we've gone into another realm and you guys don't want to go there.
So play nice.
Play nice. Like, do what it is you do that I know you do so that I don't have to worry about it.
Wow.
Yeah. And so with that, like that's a little bit of a theme within it is how do you manage when you see, like you were just talking about PTSD, how is it that you can see these things and come home to your wife and 2 kids? And what do you do to release the pressure?
I was talking recently to somebody about addiction and people that deal with it. The story sort of goes that a guy was diagnosed with as bipolar, and he was, say, 40. And she said to him, if you are bipolar this age, there's no way you've lived this life without medicating in some way. Let's go over what that is. How have you been medicating yourself to deal with the condition you have? Because if I'm going to prescribe some medication for your bipolar disorder and you continue whatever self-medication you've been doing, it's going to be a waste of time. So like, there are healthy ways to deal with, I can't imagine the things your dad must have seen.
Well, I've thought about that a lot. So let's say you and I, we have a couple of buddies and we go out and get beers every Wednesday night. That's just our thing in our neighborhood. But one of our buddies, Jeff, is a prick and always gets into fights every time, gets drunk and gets into fights.
Uh-huh.
Now in the 70s, that was just crazy Jeff.
Right.
That was just Jeff, our crazy buddy. And then there was Dan who did his weird thing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, in the age we live in now, right, it's sort of a post-psychotherapy era. For the most part, if you have any experience in that, you just don't have those kind of friends because that's abnormal.
Right.
But back then, everybody just sort of labeled their friend like, well, he always gets faced and, drives off in his car.
Right. You can't do that.
Yeah. And I think, too, are you brave enough back then to try to find out where the pain comes from?
I'd say no, you self-medicate.
Right. And also in the case of my father and many men of his generation, if you're not a man, by whatever definition that is, and the definition's pretty clear in that era,
mm-hmm.
then what are you? What is it that you're trying to do?
Well, if you are a man in that era, you take care of it yourself.
Right. And you also...
You repress it and pour liquor on it or whatever.
For sure.
Or food or sex or gambling or whatever.
All of that. Yeah. It sort of speaks to the time we're in now because I think we're sort of in that post, I wouldn't say masculinity, but maybe like a blind masculinity where it's like, I think as you get older, you find out things about, like I found out things about my father and I thought, oh, well, then that makes sense. But he couldn't discover that. Where would he find that out?
Mm-hmm.
Where would he find remedy? He's just not. He's not going to find remedy in 1982 working Vice.
Right.
Busting drug dealers and pimps and whatever they were doing. You're not going to find that You're going to go to the LAPD sponsored therapist?
No.
Did they even have one? And
That probably didn't even have
right.
one.
And even if they did, the amount of shit you'd get from all the guys at work it's just not worth it.
Yeah, you're either in the club or you're not, and you take your lumps.
Right.
Plus, things have escalated on another facet of it. Things have escalated to the point that guy you get in a fist fight with, his buddy might pull a gun. There's shootings happen, or maybe we just didn't hear about the shootings as much as we do now. You know what I mean? The communication is like somebody's pulled out a gun, somebody's shooting someplace where there shouldn't be guns at all, and guns are going off.
Yeah, well, I mean, we do have more guns now than we did 40 years ago on the streets. That's just math.
Yeah.
You know, I also think people's attitudes have changed for good or bad on authority, on whatever they believe their rights are.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have a right to do X, Y, and Z, where before that was sort of unheard of, you know. But it is remarkable that there wasn't that much gunplay. You know, I'm sure there was some, but I talked to these old guys and they're like, yeah, I went my whole career and pulled my gun once.
Wow. I think guns come out a lot more now.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the unknown is the scariest thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, I'm telling this guy I need to see his hands and he's not showing me his hands. So why is that? It's a scary thing walking up on a car, I would imagine.
Yeah. Well, it's scary for both sides, and
both sides for sure.
I don't even want to go down that rabbit hole right now. I do think, did your dad become a cop? Did he serve in the military?
He did. My dad was Vietnam era, but did not go to Vietnam. He went to high school here in the Valley and took a photography class in high school. And he put that on his draft card or whatever you put for your information. And so instead of going overseas, got sent to Fort Huachuca, which is in Arizona, and developed spy photography. They have a big photo development place there. Yeah. So
wow,
he made out on that deal.
Yeah, he did. Wow. I feel like a lot of police forces, I'm not really basing this on a whole lot. Well, I mean, I've been around cops a little bit, that they like people out of the military. They're from that sort of military rank and file and taking orders and that kind of stuff. And I think the dynamic for law enforcement or peace officer or whatever politically correct label we need to put on it, I think that's got to change. In my brilliance, I think police officers need to have a 4-year degree. And I think they've got to take classes, not in just, SWAT tactics. They've got to take philosophy classes. They got to take psychology classes. They've got to take all kinds of behavioral science classes. I think I read a statistic that a police officer, and I'm just throwing this out of my ass, a police officer that has a college degree is less likely to draw a weapon than one without in a given situation. I'm totally paraphrasing and throwing a blanket over this, but if you have a college degree, you're more likely to resort to your reasoning than to your special weapons and tactics. You have a take on that?
Yeah, I think that the nature of police work has changed. I think that for the most part, if you are a patrolman, and again, this is just from me talking to people, so if I'm wrong, then I'm wrong. But most of what you deal with is arguments between individuals.
Domestic violence?
Domestic
unrest?
Yes. And not even violence. People that call the police because she threw a pot. She threw a pot and it didn't hit me, but I'm in the other room and I'm scared for my life. And so you go up to this house. You've never been in this house. You've got 2 people yelling. You might have a dog, a kid. And the situation is volatile. And who amongst us, right? Like, who wants to deal with that situation? But that, for the most part, is, especially in a big city, that's what you're dealing with. You're dealing with people dealing with addiction. You're dealing with drug addicts. So there is a pretty good need for nuance. It isn't a brute force job anymore. And look, some people wish it still was, but I don't think that's the job.
Say that again?
It's not a brute force job anymore.
Yeah.
And you hear people lament that. Oh, I wish it was like the old days. Well, that just world doesn't exist anymore.
No, I don't think it does either.
Well, I mean, look in the history of Los Angeles and even in New York with Stonewall.
Yeah.
Isn't that what it was called? Stonewall, where there
was a nightclub.
Yeah. there was a known nightclub that had homosexuals.
Yeah.
That's where they would meet, right? So they go in there and roust them, and they would do this weekly. Well, in Los Angeles, there's a long history of that, of vice crimes, of locking people up because a man's wearing a dress. Like, those aren't the good old days. That was a growing pain. That was a mistake. And we've learned from that. So there are certain things that we all, whether it be police work or whatever, have to realize, oh yeah, we got past that. And so now we can move forward with how we want to deal with things today. Because I just don't see.
Yeah, I think you nailed it.
I think the job is different.
Most of those domestic situations involve drugs and alcohol. And with that comes what I was talking about earlier. They're self-medicating for some kind of a behavioral situations. They probably got some kind of mental health issue in a lot of cases.
I have to tell you a funny story. My buddy is a policeman. And, I always ask him, give me a funny story. So he was working North Hollywood Division. And if you know Los Angeles, part of North Hollywood Division is the area of Studio City on the Hill, which is traditionally sort of the high rent district.
Laurel Canyon.
Right. So they get a call that there's been a burglary at this woman's house. So they drive up to this house and the woman greets them at the door. And he said, nice enough looking woman. She opens the door and, she's just, oh, I can't believe. And he says, can we come in? They walk in and he walks in and this living room is just tossed. And he says, oh, I'm awful sorry, ma'am. I'm sorry what they did. And she goes, oh, no one got in here. They only got in the back. Her house was a fucking
Did she know a burglar
before the burglars got there? Like, oh, no, this room with all the stuff all over? No, they didn't even get in here. They got in the back.
Funny. And there is the lighter side of police work. A very big thank you to Tim Lovestedt for spending some time with The Modern Moron. Hopefully we can get him back on the show and see how his project progresses, hopefully to the next binge-worthy show on Netflix Prime BO, one of those places. Regarding my comment about officers being less likely to draw a weapon, that was in an article from MSNBC, take that as you will, titled U.S. Police, Education Levels and the Use of Force. Shocking to know that I was incorrect. The point from the article stated that officers with some college education are less likely to resort to force than those who have never attended college. I said less likely to draw a weapon, and that was incorrect. There is a link to that article at the bottom of the description as well. Next week, we'll have a visit from the senator. Yeah, who, according to him, all of you have been asking about. Through some very diligent inquiry, I am able to discover that all of you, in air quotes, is actually two of you that he saw at a wine tasting. Speaking of whining, he will have an account of his Lake Tahoe backpacking hike, which is a bit different than the accounts I heard from some of our mutual acquaintances. Hard to imagine the senator stretching the truth and aggrandizing himself, isn't it? I just can't picture it. Thank you again, as always, for listening to The Modern Moron. Visit themodernmoron.com to contact us, click subscribe, and like, and rate us with 17 stars, and tweet us, and re-Facebook us, and all of that. And we'll see you next time.